Thank you for this opportunity to speak to all of you. My name is Gus Tugendhat, and as Matt said, I'm the founder of Tussell. After a career spent in investment banking and the business information industry, I set up Tussell in 2015 to fill the gap for useful and reliable information on public contracting. A niche, some people said when I set up the business, but a niche accounting for 10% of UK GDP, I reply. I like to call public procurement the biggest market hiding in plain sight. Since I set up the company, we've become the market's trusted source of data on government contracting. For example, when you read a story in the press about the volume of new contracts for the inspection of RAC, or the largest suppliers exposed to Birmingham City Council, or which Big Four firm earns the most from government on an annual basis, then it's certainly our data that the article is based on. My main message to you today is this: you're lucky to be sitting here. That's got nothing to do with me. It's because now is a historically good time to be collaborating with the public sector. I say that partly because the alternative of selling to the public sector, selling directly to consumers or to the companies serving them, is getting much, much harder for all the reasons that we're well aware of: the cost of living, inflation, and other headwinds at home and abroad. So when I say that you're at the right place at the right time, it's mostly on account of three mega trends. And I'm going to look a bit beyond kind of AI and some of the other things. I'm going to focus on a kind of time span of decades here for a second. But it's mostly on account of three mega trends which are going to shape our lives in the coming decades and change the role of the state within our lives. Those three mega trends are decarbonizing the economy, which in spite of Rishi Sunak's recent kind of pullback is something which is happening and needs to happen and has very far-reaching implications. Number two is adapting to quite a rapidly aging population and the pressure that that's going to put on healthcare and social care, to name just two areas. And the third mega trend is rearming to meet the military threats that have seemed inconceivable in the last 30 years since the end of the Cold War. These megatrends are akin to the transformation of society that took place in 1945 after the end of the Second World War, the period that gave rise to the welfare state. In short, we are living in an era of big government. The times require the sort of interventionist state that hauled the economy out of the depths of the pandemic, that can build wind farms and power stations, that can come up with a new settlement for social care and keep up with the demand for critical care, that can devote at least 2% of GDP to NATO, while also sending enough arms for Ukraine to defend itself and patrolling the South China Sea. And the good news is that the government cannot achieve these goals without all of you in the room. Per the title of today's conference, we must help the government to build a state that is not just bigger, but also smarter. So, historically, selling to the public sector wasn't that sexy. But now you find yourselves covering a government marketplace that is bigger than ever before, that is characterized by the provision of steady, essential services, not fads, and where growth is going to be driven by three of the megatrends I've mentioned and other kind of smaller ones. But that's not all. One other factor makes selling to government quite different to selling to the private sector, and that's transparency. The government, to its credit, holds itself accountable to levels of openness that provide a staggering amount of insight into your markets, your customers, and even your competitors. Why would you not take advantage of that? And that is where we at Tussell come in. We believe that the best way to position yourself for success in this growing market is, quite simply, to know your customers inside out. To be able to answer questions like, who is buying the products and services that I'm selling? How much are they spending? Who are their incumbent suppliers? When do the live contracts come up for renewal? Which framework should I be on? Is the tender that I'm bidding on is that tender really worth bidding on? And who makes IT purchasing decisions in this ministry or that local council? So, the presentation I'm going to give you today is a high-level illustration of how to map your addressable market in the public sector. I'd like you to come out of this session not just having heard a pitch, but knowing more about your revenue opportunity than when you came in. So let's put that to the test. I won't dwell on this. For those of you who hadn't heard about Tussell until 5 minutes ago, we're a London-based scale-up, and though we're still quite small, we are privileged to do business with most of the top suppliers to government across a range of sectors, but IT and consulting in particular. Our data is so good that the government relies on it to better understand their own spend, suppliers, transparency, compliance, etc. And as I mentioned, our data was cited in the press a mere 260 times last year. All the data I'm about to show you is based on turning open data published by the government into useful data that you can use to make decisions on and take actions from. So everything I'm going to show you can be audited, can be defended, and can be traced back to a contract, a tender, or even an invoice. So be careful about punching back on the data because I can defend it too. So let's start nice and broad with just kind of how big the market is and how fast it's growing. I'm just going to focus on the last bar for the fiscal year ending March 2022. We've since updated it for another year, but we did this presentation a while ago and we just kind of froze the data at that point. In the most recent year, the government spent a whopping £18 billion, give or take, with IT and telecoms companies. IT accounted for about 85% of the total, and the market grew by a chunk in year one of COVID, and then far from giving up those gains, it simply locked them in and carried on growing from there. So the market has been structurally expanded by the pandemic for all the kind of reasons around kind of digital adoption and working from home that we are all aware of. This slide is a kind of high-level breakdown of what we call the buyer types. I don't think it'll come as any surprise that central government accounts for about 50% of the total IT procurement market by expenditure. This is all based not on contract values, which are very lumpy and a bit misleading, especially some of the framework stuff. This is based on invoices being paid by everything from ministerial bodies through to police forces to suppliers to companies like some of those in the room today. The main thing which catches my eye on this slide is actually the changing relationship between IT expenditure in the NHS, which you can see in blue, which has gone from 16% of the market in year 1 to nearly a quarter of the market in year 5, gradually kind of substituting IT spend from within local government. So it is hard to deny that austerity is not having an impact on local government. And I think that's very sad. And I think the implications of that are actually being felt by many citizens every day. You can see that breakdown by buyer type even more clearly on this slide here. Worth pointing out that the NHS IT expenditure by the NHS has grown by 119% between 2018 and 2022. That's absolutely massive. Blue light grew by a similar rate, but from a much smaller base. Local government, in spite of austerity, has not actually got smaller in absolute terms. It did grow very slightly over the period, but much less quickly than the public sector market at large. So anybody selling into that part of the market has to develop BD strategies based more on taking kind of market share than on absolute growth in expenditure of the type that we're seeing in the NHS and elsewhere. So data like this helps you to challenge or validate where you are allocating resources and what kind of BD strategies you will require in order to grow your top line in that chosen market. This slide looks at exactly the same expenditure, but this time from the supplier point of view instead of the buyer or commissioner point of view. I'm going to start with the orange line, which is going down. That refers to the absolute spend or the absolute kind of public sector revenue being earned by the top 10 GSIs or system integrators. Many of them are in this room. Many of them are clients of ours, so I have to be careful about what I say. But the data is the data, and what it's showing is that as a cohort, their revenue is broadly flat over the period, but it hasn't been growing much, and therefore, overall, that cohort is losing market share in a growing market. And the reason I think it's losing market share is because central government in particular has got much better at developing some of those capabilities in-house. And we heard about some of the agony and ecstasy of kind of delivering on these digital programs this morning in the talk. But by and large, the government is getting better at purchasing this stuff, building these kind of in-house SI capabilities. And that means it relies less on the SIs themselves to do it, and therefore can do more kind of purchasing directly from the technology vendors, the likes of Google and AWS, to name a couple. And that's why we see the pink line going up. And it's also doing a lot more kind of transactional purchasing of IT via the big IT resellers. And that's why you're seeing the blue line go up quite sharply. So the supply landscape is really evolving kind of probably more quickly than people realize. The line at the bottom in green is the spend, the absolute spend directly with SMEs. SMEs are earning more than twice the amount in the last year as they did in the first year, but their market share is actually growing quite slowly. And I think that kind of represents the challenge for big buyers in central government of spending money directly with SMEs. The will is there, but in practice, it's quite hard. So if you're an SME, data like this helps you to understand which partners, which companies you should be partnering with in order to bring your innovative solutions to market, to reach the audience, the end audience that you want to sell to. And if you're a very large company, then data like this also helps you to understand which SMEs you should be trying to kind of lure into your supply chain. The government is very serious about social value, and the more that you can position yourselves as a conduit for subcontracting business to innovative local companies based wherever you are deploying your solution, I think the more kind of attractive and competitive you can make your bid. So there ought to be a real symbiosis between large companies and small ones, even if not that much spend is yet going directly to the SMEs.